How do you manage larger and larger teams? That's a question that I get quite regularly from managers at all different levels on as you increase the number of employees and scope that you manage, whether it's when you start with 3 to 5 employees, then move to 10, 25, 100, 1,000, some cases, tens of thousands of employees. How do you actually then manage a team of that size as it grows? And when I talk about it to people through discussion, I think about it in terms of time. And in the 9-part series, I talked a little bit about the impacts of how employees feel. And I'm going to talk about it from both sides, from the employee side, managing up with your manager, and then as a manager, managing with your employees. I'm going to start from the manager perspective first. So when you talk about managing, I think the challenge comes into play if employees feel that you are micromanaging them. Why is that? And as a manager and as you scale, you can't know the details of every project. And I think it's challenging because when you start off with a small team and you're learning management skills, core management skills of project management and how to set up metrics and tracking, well, you're going to do that a lot by nature. That becomes your muscle memory. And then as you scale out, you'll realize that time as a currency is a finite resource. And you cannot manage large number of people that way because you just don't have time to be in all the details, nor do you want to be, because you can't know all the details to make informed decisions. So I want to separate out what it means to be a manager in terms of being accountable for the work that gets done. And we talk about setting good deliverables and timelines and direction. But when it comes to the execution of the work, it's easier to think about it in terms of if I don't have to get into the details because we agree on the deliverable or the destination, then I can spend more time setting more deliverables and more directions for other areas, and hence the scope scale increase. And I think it's challenging at every level when you get comfortable with a certain level of disassociation from the details, that it's not an easy thing to track. It's not an easy thing to see the transition. Like if you double your team from 500 to 1,000, well, very clearly something has to change, because if you're maxed out in the amount of details that you sit in for a full week of work and you double that, I mean, the math just doesn't add up. So something's got to give. And so for me, when people have asked me, well, how did I do it? It comes down to the concept of, do I need to manage the team, or should maybe I switch my thinking a little bit about being an arbitrator? Now, managing means you have responsibility, you set direction, all things we talked about. But an arbitrator is really about settling disputes. So if you think about a direction that you've set and the team is executing against that, and you don't have to worry about the details, and maybe you can just be an arbitrator when there's a disconnect in direction, or the path has to change because of new data. But you don't have to know all the data day in and day out, particularly if you set good deliverables with an expectation of time to get there. And I think this is what's really helped me over the course of my career, is to think about, how do I empower my employees to really think of me as an arbitrator? Now, that's an uncomfortable situation for employees at times, because being an arbitrator and letting the manager be empowered to make more decisions means that they are now accountable for certain decisions that maybe if they asked you what your direction was or what your decision is, then that accountability then is transferred back up to you. But in order, then, if you think about the vicious circle, is if somebody asks me to make the decision and they don't want to make it, and maybe they could have made it, well, now I have to know all the details again, because I don't want to make an uninformed decision, right? Because I'm not in the details every day. So it's a vicious circle that you can get into, which says, well, if I don't treat my manager like an arbitrator, or if I don't empower my employees to really make decisions and say it's okay to make a decision, just make an informed one. And we talked about building trust. Now, I'm going to just touch on that. The building trust section that I did is extremely important, because the more that you as a manager trust your employee and vice versa, the more your manager or you will be comfortable in letting that go. So it does kind of play together that if you don't have that level of trust with how an employee that works for you makes decisions, what do they take in consideration? What are the pros and cons? What options do they consider? If you don't build that trust, then you'll probably want to know the details. Because again, when you think about it from a manager perspective, you are still accountable for everything that happens in the group. So I think that's where, as people move through the stages, the way we approach it has to change, as well as the uncomfortableness that you get in the details has to change. So building that core skill with your employees to basically treat you as an arbitrator and take accountability for the decisions in the areas for how things get done, assuming that you've negotiated good deliverables based on the direction that you've set, can be very powerful for scaling out, because then you don't have to worry about all the details from what that your employees are working through, but they will bring you the issues that really do require your decisions. For example, sometimes they'll come across a big issue that requires a change in the direction. Well, you don't want them to make that on their own, because it probably impacts other areas of your org. So that's a good one then for them to bring to you as an arbitrator, to then decide based on the data which direction you should go in. Not managing it, but ensuring the direction remains consistent with the vision and the goals. And I think that's, for me, when I talk to individuals about how I try to do the work myself, it's really about empowering the team members and the managers from the first level up. And the level of decision-making changes along the way. But it's a skill that you have to practice in order to get better at it. And again, as a manager, I have to get uncomfortable with the team doing things that, frankly, I may know I've already done it and could do it better, but they don't learn if they don't get the opportunity to do it. So from a manager down, I really do try to focus on, how do I empower them to treat me as an arbitrator? That will allow them to take more responsibility and also more decision-making, and maybe some uncomfortableness as well. And that's, again, pressures how you grow, to be able then to run a business on your own. Because as you get to be more senior, what you'll find is you will almost never talk with your manager. You are expected to run the business with very little, you have direction, but very little management in the details, but then they don't have time. Remember, if you're managing a lot of people, they're managing even more. So this is something that can be worked its way up, which will then allow you to scale out more when your team doubles. If you're growing your career and you're growing your management scope and you're continuing, to take on more work, the math won't add up if you're fully booked all week long with your current scope level, and then they double the scope and they give you a new team. You really can't do the same work if you're working at 100%, which means that something has to give. And for senior leaders, I can assure you that many times their teams are basically treating them as arbitrators, because there's no way a manager can get in all the details of, say, a 20,000 person organization. The managers then underneath those leaders know when it's appropriate to bring up things at a more tactical level to go through, because they impact the larger business and business goals at scale. So that's, just a bit about, as a manager, what it means to be an arbitrator, and how to empower your teams to treat you as an arbitrator. Now, let's flip that the other way. Let's say, do I treat my manager like an arbitrator? I try to, because if you think about building trust with your manager, and the trust that you've built through them learning how you think and you training them, in the training your manager segment I did, that is critical, because if you want them to basically treat you like an arbitrator, well, then you need to make sure they have confidence in you in making those decisions. And that comes through that trust relationship. So the more you can treat your manager like an arbitrator, and if you think about that being the goal, that actually, for me, changes the way that I engage with my manager, because I don't necessarily want him in all the details, because I don't want to have to take the time to educate them on all the details. So I have to get them comfortable with allowing me as an individual to make decisions. And the best way to do that, after building trust and having them learn how you think and how you make decisions, then they will give you more. They will give you more scope, because that trust of delivery and that trust in the fact they don't have to get in the details, and also displays that you can scale out even further. So when I talk about arbitration versus management, and I'm not saying to step away, and I think that's one of the lessons I learned through the years, is that some people take that literally, say, well, you need to manage your team and I'm not going to get into risk. That's not true at all. As a manager, you still have to set good checkpoints and have good reviews and make sure things are on track and be available to help out. It doesn't mean step all the way away. What it means, though, is as you get more comfortable with empowering more, you should be able to step further away, because you know how the business will run by the individuals that work for you, and therefore you can step away to work on larger things at scale. So the concept of arbitration versus managing has been a big one in my career, especially because I found, like everybody, when you start getting teams just assigned to you through a reorg, well, the math just doesn't work. And when you find yourself working longer hours, just trying to keep up with the same tool set, which is what I call brute forcing it. What you're doing works for one team, you'll just throw more hours at it and I'll move forward and I'll just take nights and weekends doing it. And I think those are the kinds of things that lead to burnout. So as your scope increases, I believe one of the key skills that I know I've used was this arbitration mindset, which is you can't step away. You can't step completely outside the bounds of the responsibility. So you have to know that how to set the balance for yourself in the level of detail, updates, weekly status reports, or you're going to have stand-ups, whatever it is that works for you to step up and out a little bit more and empower is a really good thing. And the things that I always encourage people to think about in terms of uncomfortableness is it will be uncomfortable. It will be uncomfortable to not ask for the details. And when you feel that, I would always suggest that you take the step back to say, do I really need to know this? And baby steps are important here, because again, you don't want to be worrying every night when you go to sleep on whether or not things are getting done. But if you do keep it in mind, if that's a goal in the direction that you want to head in order to scale out your scope as a manager or leader, or even as an IC, it really comes down to whether or not you want to manage it, or maybe there's an opportunity to become more of an arbitrator, which then will allow other people to take some responsibility, particularly the managers on your team or the people working for you, and also show their innovation, because they may, the more you're in the details, expect you to do it their way. And to be clear, I struggle with this as well. This is not a new concept. I mean, we all have some feeling that we want to see certain things, but I would say just try to open up the mindset that says, hey, is this an opportunity where I might not need to know the details if we're still on a good track to the negotiated direction that we plan to go? So that's just one of the topics that I've been asked about quite a bit, actually, is how to scale. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. So if you want to put some thoughts in the comments, I'm sure a lot of people could benefit from your thoughts as well. Thank you.